Welcome to The Human Edge. This week's guest is David Brown. David is a leadership coach and he's also a martial arts instructor. For me, talking with David was like having a masterclass in vulnerability, openness, in leadership. I loved asking the questions and listening to his really articulate, thoughtful, self-aware answers. I hope you loved it as much as I do. And if you do, please like, please share, please subscribe, all of that good stuff. It would be massively appreciated. Thank you. So thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
There's so much to cover today. I wanted to talk about your work, first of all. Sovereign leadership.
Sovereign leadership.
What does that mean?
So I come from a perspective of using the archetypes, which are, if you like, universal patterns, universal themes that you can see across all cultures and across all times that manifest themselves in men and in women. So the four archetypes that I would use are king, warrior, lover, and magician. That for people who are in that world, Carl Jung, sort of isolated, if you like, those four archetypes as masculine archetypes. But I don't use the word king, I use the word sovereign so that it doesn't have any kind of gender, there's no gender specificity to it, particularly in this world where we have gender fluidity, and that seemed like it was really, really important.
Yeah.
So the word that I use instead of king would be sovereign, so then that can be king, and that could be queen, and that can be whatever. So we had one client who, the sovereign sense of her was this kind of gypsy flamenco, and she's Argentinian and she has Spanish ancestry and all this sort of thing. So it kind of fits beautifully, right? That gypsy should be the archetype that she would have in her leadership.
Yeah.
So sovereign leadership would be the kind of the amalgamation of all of those aspects, all of those qualities of a person, be that what shows itself in warrior or lover or magician or sovereign. And the sovereign qualities would be around leadership of values, purpose, meaning, vision, mission, all of those things. Lover would be around relationships, relationship with yourself, relationship with other people, relationship with the world. Magician would be vision-based stuff, creativity, a sort of spiritual aspect as well, I think would definitely be included in that. And then the final one, warrior. Which one of the things that links us, martial arts.
Yes, we are definitely going to come on to that.
We are definitely going to come on to that. That's very exciting.
Yeah.
But that's also about things like boundaries, being like a fierce stand for what you believe in, your values, and taking a stand for those things in the world, even if that means that there's going to be conflict, there's going to be clashing, there's going to be opposition to that.
Yeah, so it's not coming from an aggressive, acquisitive perspective necessarily. It's a fighting for what you stand for, what you believe in.
Yeah. Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the kind of the aspect that I like to think is quite unique in the direction that we come from is one of embodiment. So rather than it just being a psychological thing, that there is this embodied sense of what each of those archetypes looks and feels like. And because the archetypes in themselves are sort of these universal things, each person has their unique embodiment of each of those archetypes, right? Yeah. So your unique embodiment would include, your culture, the country you come from, the traditions that you uphold, all the influences that go to create a human being. All of that is going to be implicit in your unique embodiment and your unique expression of each of those archetypes. And so therefore, your sovereign leadership is going to be a unique expression of that as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking about our our bodily experience day to day, and I think it's fair to say, well, certainly I can say for myself, that even though I do karate, and even though I'm on in the self-development world, my sense of my own body and what it's doing day to day and what it's telling me is quite low, and I think I'm probably no different from most people that aren't really aware of what our bodies are trying to tell us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would definitely say that is true for most of us. And I think that there's a really good reason for that, in the sense that our parents' generation and even their parents' generation, certainly in the sort of the West, white,
yes,
that thing. But I think it's true for lots of people in different parts of the world, and we're all kind of like at each part of the world is at a different point in that development. Not to say that the West white is further along than anyone, it's just we're all at different places.
Yeah.
But I think that there's definitely been a need for people to ignore what their bodies are telling them, to ignore what feels right to them, because there's been a huge amount of social pressure coming from all kinds of different directions, but there's been a lot of pressure for people to have to deny what they feel, or to deny what they feel that they want to express.
Yeah.
And because of that, the way to survive that, the way to get through that, is to just ignore what it is that your body is telling you. For me, again, sovereign leadership is about reconnecting to that. And that can often be quite a painful thing to do. Yeah. But it feels like it's really important if we are going to step into our leadership in a really compassionate and empathic way.
What's your own experience, your own journey been like in kind of reconnecting to your own body in the way that you do with your clients?
Yeah. So if I go right back, so I was brought up in a very loving, caring family experience, and at the same time, my parents were the products of exactly what I was just talking about, having to disconnect from what they truly felt, how they truly wanted to express things. And so when I uniquely expressed myself, my parents didn't know how to deal with that at all. They didn't know how to hold it. They didn't know how to kind of allow me to do that in any other way other than just to kind of let me kind of explode, I guess would probably be the best way to put it. But that they didn't know how to make that okay. They didn't know how to help me manage it other than to just push it down and almost like make it bad, make it wrong that I was feeling that way. So I went through my early life and my early adulthood kind of believing that that was the way to express myself, that that was the way to be in the world. And what I've noticed, or the way that I like to think about it now, is that if you think of like a picture inside a picture frame, that there are whole areas of that picture that are completely blacked out or blanked out. And so there's only a partial picture, if you like, of the whole thing. Or maybe like a jigsaw, that there are bits of the jigsaw that have been taken out, and there are pieces. And I don't quite like the notion of that there are pieces missing, that the pieces are there, but that the pieces that are there are blanked out.
Right.
So you can't see them. Yeah. And when you can't see them, then there's also, like, you're not aware of them. what Carl Jung, to go back to him, what Carl Jung often referred to as shadow. So these parts of yourself that you're not aware of, and those parts of ourselves that we're not aware of still have a huge, potent influence on our behaviour and our thinking and our feeling and how we perceive the world and how we perceive ourselves and how we interact with the world around us. But if we're not aware of them, then they work on us in ways that we're just not even aware of.
Yeah.
So one of those examples that I'm really kind of grappling with at the moment is this what was an unconscious pattern, but I'm becoming more aware of it, is like outsourcing my power and my agency to other people and to other actors in the world.
And specifically, what do you mean by that, by outsourcing?
So rather than taking full responsibility for how I want to be able to shape the world, I will give that over to other people and allow other people to shape my world for me.
Right.
And rather than fight for that, for my own expression of that and my own shaping of the world, I'll give it away to other people, which is inherently disempowering.
Yeah.
And that all comes from me.
Yeah.
So until I saw that as something that I could take responsibility for, I was always looking at other people and going, well, it's their fault, and it's because of this and it's because of that. And whilst those things are true actors, and they're all things that influence my world and impact my world, when I take responsibility for those things, then I'm in a position to be able to be really creative and adaptive and be able to shape things differently in spite of all of those things.
Yeah. And the bodily experience then, or the contrast between being or disempowering yourself and then taking control, how does that feel in the body?
Well, it has a feeling of victimhood. It has a feeling of like collapse is often the word that is used. So like the shoulders come in, the sternum kind of moves back towards the spine. There's a looking down. There's a sense of making oneself small. One of my teachers, called Paul Linden, refers to it as smallify. So people make themselves small. And it's like you're not, you're trying not to take space. You're trying not to be seen. You're trying not to be heard. And that all of those are sort of signs of patterns of victimhood, of disempowerment. And whilst that process often takes place when we're children or young adults, and that they're lessons that we learn from the adults around us and the world around us, we take that on board, we take those lessons on board, and then we start to play out those patterns in our adult life when we actually do have the agency and the autonomy and the empowerment to do that for ourselves, but we're not owning that empowerment. And that's the bit that I certainly had to relearn it, and with my clients I'm certainly seeing that there's lots and lots of repetition of that in people's lives in different ways. Even people that are incredibly successful in what they do, there's still aspects of that.
In certain situations.
Exactly. And of course, that old expression of, what got you here isn't going to get you out there. So again, there's this process of, well, okay, I can do all of this stuff and it's got me so far, but if I want to get to the next stage, then I need to take ownership of the next bit.
And conversely, I'm imagining that the body feeling sensations when you step into your own power, your own control is like the exact opposite of what you were describing. Well, you give me the words.
Yeah, well, it's an expansion, so it's expansive. It's it's like you're expanding in all directions. So the chest comes forward, but also the back goes back. So there's a sense of sensing your own back. So a sense of having your own back.
Okay.
There's a sense of walking purposefully through the world. There's a sense of even just the way you sit and stand and walk through the world just feels very directional, very calm, very grounded, very centered, and that there isn't this sense of panic and rush and overwhelm and anxiety that tends to come when you don't have that being centered and grounded in this single place.
Yeah. One thing I've learned very recently is that it is possible to change your internal narrative if you change what your body is doing.
Yes.
And this was a bit of a revelation for me, and literally something I only really realised a few weeks ago. And I don't think most people understand that either. You can be in a certain pattern of thought, but if you change the way what your body is doing, or as you say, opening up rather than contracting, it can completely change the dynamics.
Yeah. So a great example is if you fold your arms.
Yeah, I'm doing it now.
Fold your arms.
Yeah.
Right? So to you, it makes sense to fold your arms that way round. It wouldn't even occur to you to fold your arms the other way.
Yeah.
So if you fold your arms the other way...
Yeah, let's see if I can actually...
Exactly.
Yeah, it feels...
Right,
yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
right? So you haven't done it quite exactly the same, but there is... Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as you do that, and I invite the people that are listening into this to do this as well, that there's this sense of, well, it actually feels really different.
Yeah.
And like everything about the way you arrange yourself and organise yourself is different as a result of that, right? Yeah. And it feels weird, it feels unfamiliar.
Yeah, but not necessarily wrong.
No, it feels wrong, but it's only because that's unfamiliar, right? You can,
thank you.
But yeah, there's that sense of it feels unfamiliar, so therefore it feels wrong, and it feels different, and it feels uncomfortable. Yeah. And this is the process of coaching, and this is the process that sovereign leaders, I think, they're in this process all the time, is that they're challenging their belief. And the kind of the commonality between the mind and the body is that you're still using the same nervous system, right? So the patterns and habits that you have in your movement they become habits the same reason that thoughts become habits. Yes. Because your nervous system just carves out this pathway that feels very familiar to you. And because there's that commonality, the nervous system, when you change the way you hold yourself, you can't help but therefore change the nervous system, and therefore it has an impact on your thinking. And the same thing happens the other way around. Yes. So it's bi-directional, right? It just doesn't happen in one direction, it happens in both directions, and it happens simultaneously. And often what's great about the body is that it's easier to change how you hold yourself and how you move than it is to change the way you think. Yes. But if you change the way you hold yourself and the way you move, then you'll change the way you think.
It's fascinating.
It really is fascinating. Yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit, although staying on the same theme of sovereignty, one of the things that I know interests you is sovereignty of the planet.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that means to you and how and kind of what you're doing in that space?
So back to this idea of archetypes and these archetypes as universal themes. So, right, I've got to bring in martial arts here now.
Yeah, that's good. We can use it as a segue as well.
Yeah. So, my martial arts teacher, who I met in 1990, so when I was 19, he has an expression that he used quite a lot back in those early days. Wisdom of universal validity.
Wisdom of universal validity.
Wisdom of universal validity. By which he meant, or at least what I think he meant, is a again, it doesn't matter what culture, it doesn't matter about what time, it doesn't matter about what country or what gender or what experience. There's some wisdom that is just universally true.
Yeah.
Right? And the archetypes are an example of that. So that means that that wisdom is kind of what Jung would probably refer to as transpersonal. So it goes beyond the individual, right? It goes even beyond the human into a realm that is beyond the human experience. So once you get into beyond the human experience, then what are you talking about? Well, you're talking about the plants, and you're talking about the planet, and you're talking about what we might think of as kind of not thinking, not feeling aspects of nature. But those things are part of nature,
yes.
Right? So once you start to look at things in that much bigger context, then, to my understanding of it, sovereign leadership then has to include not just me personally and not just us collectively, but the whole thing in a kind of planetary, global aspect as well. So one of the things that I love is this idea that the American Indians had, right, of when they had to make decisions about things, that they would come together and they would talk about what are the part of what they would talk about is, what is the impact that this decision is going to have, not on this generation, but 7 generations. So we're talking about, what is the impact of this decision 150, 200 years from now? And because they were so intimately connected to the land, that they weren't just talking about what is this impact going to have on the people, and but it would also be what impact is it going to have on the environment. So one of the aspects of sovereignty that I like to talk about is this idea of stewardship or custodianship, but the stewardship of the planet, the stewardship of the ecosystems that support us, right? And it just makes so much sense that we need to be caring for the planet in order to ensure our own survival. And if we don't do that, then we're not going to survive. So it seems essential.
And relatively recently you visited Antarctica.
I did.
What did that show you about, maybe that you didn't already know, about where we are as a species and in relation to the planet as well?
Well, I think I've spent a lot of time in scientific circles, reading a lot about nature, reading a lot about the environment, about biology, about physics and chemistry and all of these things. So I feel like I'm probably maybe better informed than most people just because of my interests, really. But what had me say yes to this particular trip to the Antarctic was the title of the trip was called Stewardship Antarctica. So there was this stewardship aspect that I thought was really attractive to me at the time. And there are a couple of things. One is, so I was there in 2024, and this time last year actually, and that year bird flu had arrived in Antarctica.
For the first time?
For the first time.
Right.
Affecting penguin populations in isolated islands in the Antarctic. Completely disconnected from any land, from to Europe or anything. So it goes to, so for me that was a really profound thing, that part of what creates bird flu is, and this is my understanding, so I don't actually know if this is fully scientifically accurate, but my understanding of bird flu is that it comes as a result of farming chickens maybe other fowl as well, but my understanding is of chickens, farming them in a commercially viable way that means that you have loads of chickens in very, very small confined spaces, and disease flourishes in those sorts of environments, right? So nature creates ways of being able to create balance around that because things are out of balance. So it creates something like bird flu that's going to redress that balance because things are out of balance. But of course then, and that's in Europe mostly, but then somehow, because all things are interconnected, it finds itself from Europe to America, and then finding its way down the American continent, down into South America, and then it finds its way into the Antarctic. And it just really highlighted to me humanity's short-sighted way of looking at things solely for the purpose of profit. Now, I'm not trying to vilify profit. Profit's really important in the economic structures that we have in our modern society. So I'm not saying that that's bad, but profit without thinking about the impact on humanity, profit without thinking about the impact that it has on the planet, is just short-sightedness, and it is going to end up biting us on the bum. And that's going to be one of those examples, right? So whilst maybe people aren't going to care about that because, frankly, it doesn't bother them that much that populations of penguins are dying, but there's a bigger interconnectedness that they're a part of that is going to have all kinds of probably unknown and perhaps unseen impacts that are going to play out over the next however many years, and we all suffer as a result of that. So that was one aspect of it.
And your work then in relation to sovereignty for leaders and the planet is helping. I'm imagining helping your clients think more holistically, more long term about the actions that they're taking, and in relation to the businesses that they're running or the decisions that they're making in their lives.
Yeah. So, in its simplest term, the thing that I love about sovereign leadership, the way that I'm sharing it with people, is rather than just being caught up in your head, that there is this embodied aspect to that connects people to their heart, it connects people to their belly, and to the whole of themselves, and spiritually. And when people slow down, when people get out of the rush and busyness of their mindscape, and they slow their minds down and they slow their bodies down, somehow we get an access to a wisdom that is, again, this universal. We're getting back to this universal validity. So rather than it all be about profit and all about rushing and all about doing and all about just looking busy, we can slow down and be much more effective and much more efficient and much more considered about what we do and the impact of what we do in the world. So I think we can, by slowing down and giving ourselves time to reflect and contemplate, we can get a lot more done without doing as much, which gives us more time and space for other aspects of our lives that are incredibly important for our health and our well-being.
It's beautifully put.
I've given it a lot of thought.
Yes.
And it comes out different every time. But, yeah.
And it seems to me that we're finally ready to talk about martial arts, and martial arts will play a part in that. My own experience of practicing karate is that it helps me get into that space of being more intentional, getting out of my head, getting into my body. So you were 19 when you met your teacher. Your martial art is Bushido, right?
Mhm.
How is so karate for me? It's about a balance between striking and blocking and a little bit of grappling. What characterizes Bushido?
Well, one of the things that I loved about it was, yes, there was the physicality of it. So it was a particular type of, or is a particular type of karate that does have all of those things, blocks and kicks and punches, and yes, there's some grappling to it, and there's the kind of the kata forms, and then there's the sparring, and then there's the self-defense aspect of it as well. And all of that, again, I don't know what style you do, but what I do in Bushido will look different from what you do in yours, because that's just how these things go. But one of the aspects that I really loved about what my teacher is promoting is this connection to your creativity. So there was a really, really strong aspect when you got to a certain point in your development where it's like, well, now you're creating your own stuff. You're creating your own forms, you're creating there's a kind of a spontaneity. And one of the things that I kind of took from that is that life is a creative process. So we were encouraged, for example, to, if you got something, like if you were doing a kata, if you're doing a form and you got it wrong, the encouragement was, you don't go back to the beginning, just learn to go from where you are and to create from where you are. Don't kind of backtrack. And such a difficult thing for a person, often for a person to do to begin with. But what I learned from that was this ability of, well, actually, you can't do anything wrong. You can make mistakes, you can fail, you can do all of those things, but every step that you take is the starting point for your next creative moment, your next creative endeavor. So it's just kind of getting into this mindset of, I can create from wherever I am, even if I can create from nothing.
Yeah.
And those sorts of things were really like powerful lessons that I learned that were part of that. And then what was also included in that was, we didn't just learn karate, so we also learned Aikido, which is much more about, so karate has this kind of forward linear quality to it, whereas Aikido has a more kind of circular, absorb, deflective quality to it, which it's no less effective, and it's certainly no less violent. People tend to think of Aikido as being all kind of lovey-dovey and peaceful, and the Japanese kanji kind of imply the way of peace. But actually, Aikido can be really brutal.
Yes, I talked to them briefly about Aikido the other day, and they were talking about this and how, and an interpretation of that is, you can break someone's arm.
Yes.
In an effort to avoid killing them.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Exactly. Brutal, but in the spirit of peace at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. And then also what we did a lot of was Japanese sword. So using proper Japanese like samurai swords, katanas, curved blades, to evoke more of that kind of warrior spirit, but in a very, very different way. Yeah. So it had all of these aspects to it, and then beyond that was a kind of an artistic aspect. So writing, philosophy, poetry, all of those qualities as well. Yeah. And now that's evolved into things like dance and actual art. So painting, drawing, all of those sorts of things too. So it's kind of expanded over the decades into kind of really embrace this creativity aspect. Yeah. So martial arts is part of what we do, not all of what we do. Okay.
It's fascinating, and creativity, I've talked on this podcast with creative people, or it's funny, my professional background is in the law. Mm-hmm. And I always thought of myself as not creative, right? Because I was a lawyer, I'm not creative. And I'm slowly starting to realize that couldn't be further from the truth, because we are all creative, no matter how we express that creativity.
Yes.
And
like I say, like life is a creative act.
That's it.
Just by its...
That's it. And karate is teaching me that. And in the same way, I love that concept that you can create from nothing.
Yes.
It's incredibly, incredibly powerful.
Yes.
You had a pretty rounded martial arts education, and I think you told me months ago that you were invited by your teacher to teach in the dojo at the place in your martial arts training where you weren't yet at black belt. I'm imagining if that happened to me, it would have been incredibly intimidating, nerve-wracking. What was your experience of it?
That. That, and it was a huge step into leadership. I mean, essentially, and it required that wonderful skill of leadership of kind of taking a step of faith and really just not knowing, like when your foot goes out, kind of just having to trust that there's going to be ground underneath you when your foot anticipates that there's going to be some floor there.
Yes.
And so we were really encouraged to just, one step at a time, build the students that you had, find your venue, grow the size of your venue depending on what you needed, but also to really promote the standard and the quality of your students. And I did for 9 years. I worked full time, and I had my dojo as a part-time thing. And I remember in 2000, right at the beginning of 2005, I was like, okay, I gave up my career in science, and I did martial arts full time. And that was a huge step, because it was, again, this kind of another big step into the unknown, and not really knowing how it was going to work out. And my martial arts teacher, actually, he said to me, "It's great that you're doing this, but the standard of your students, the standard of your teaching is essentially, it's not good enough. If you want to survive at this, you have to up your game." So it was one of those things where the expression that he uses, it's like a cut and a stroke. So it's like you get the cut, and then it's like,
Yeah.
So you're not good enough to do it, but the reason I'm saying this is because you're not going to be able to sustain your business. And I really had to search deep within myself to find out, well, what the hell does that mean? What the hell does that look like? And of course, there was no formal guidance in what that looked like, because I had to find my own way. But his informal guidance was, well, this is how I do it. This is what I do to create an outstanding martial arts school. Now you go off and work out what your version of that looks like. And it took me a while, but I actually got to a point where it was, so we used to have like national gradings, where all the different dojos from the country would come. And it got to the point where it was recognized that my dojo was produced the best standard students out of all the other dojos. So that was a really, really big learning for me, that I have what it takes, but I need to be given the chance, or I have to give myself the chance and give myself permission to really look deeply into myself and go, okay, so what can I bring to the game that is uniquely me, that brings out the excellence in the people that I'm leading?
I love that story on so many different levels, but for people listening who are in whatever walk of life, there are a couple of things that stand out. One is you have to take the leap at some point. You're going to be asked to step up, or you want to step up in whatever aspect of your life, without any experience of having done that.
Yes.
And there is no substitute for having a little bit of courage.
No, there's no substitute.
The ground will meet you, as to use your analogy. You may stumble, you may even fall, but that's okay because you can get up and go again.
Yes.
So that's the first thing that came out. The second thing is, it's the story of how you kind of, once you were told by your teacher, you're not good enough at the moment where you are, you need to improve. But you had a mentor, you had somebody that you can go and talk to.
Mm-hmm.
You probably were able to see what other people were doing. There are, other mentors, other coaches out there. But ultimately, it was about looking inside yourself and figuring out what are my unique gifts and how do I bring them out? How do I surface them in order to get the best out of myself and the best out of the people that I'm leading, that I'm training?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the core teachings, if you like, of sovereign leadership now, which is what we started the conversation with, is giving people that quiet time and space to look into themselves and to surface that wisdom within themselves. I'm not here to tell you anything, but I am here to champion to use the words of my martial arts teaching, to champion the master within.
I love that, to champion the master within.
Yeah.
Okay, I might have to borrow that.
Borrow
universal
away.
Wisdom, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So coming
Well,
back again.
Wisdom of universal validity.
Thank you.
Like every person has this.
Yes,
so there's
that's right.
And that's the beautiful thing, right? Is that the kind of the Western image of leadership is that it is hierarchical and that there's a person at the top that knows what they're doing and everyone looks to that leader for guidance and direction and inspiration and all of those things.
Yeah.
And whilst there is an aspect of that, because if you're in an organisation that has a vision, then there's usually one person that had that vision and then it's their job to kind of, enroll people in that
Yes.
vision. So there is that, but there's also and every person, wherever they are in that organisation, has their own set of leadership qualities. So let's not allow people to disempower themselves, but actually let's find the ways to empower them so that they can, really lead in whatever part of the organisation they're in and whatever role they're playing.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And coming back to what you were saying before, we all have wisdom deep inside ourselves, creativity, all those kind of fundamentals that we need to lead and to live a good life.
Totally.
And it's a matter of accessing and understanding how to access what we already have inside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then that question that you asked me a little bit earlier about, like that kind of bigger picture, is that my belief is that leadership, that wisdom, is just inherent in nature. That it's no mistake that ecosystems evolve in ways where they are incredibly resilient and that there are all kinds of balances and checks within those ecosystems that mean that if, say, one part of it is weak or fails, that there aren't other parts in that ecosystem that can step up to help to balance it and redress it. And it's the same thing within ourselves, right?
Yes.
So each individual cell in our bodies has that same wisdom that all the cells collectively have. And it's kind of knowing that about ourselves on a body level, but the same thing the same thing is true for us, mentally and spiritually too.
Yeah. So coming back to something that you were talking about earlier, which is your childhood experience of this is my characterization of kind of not being comfortable talking, playing small, thinking of yourself as different. I'm comparing and contrasting that to today, where you're anything but, right. I realize it's a constant exploration, a constant kind of desire to get better. But it also seems to me that, and one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast is because conversation, in some senses, has never been more important today.
Yes.
Both on a macro level, where you look at the kind of political discourse, it's almost impossible to have a reasoned conversation.
Yeah.
And we're two men talking,
Mm-hmm.
and the incidence of mental health issues among men in society at the moment has never been worse. The amount of suicides are at a record level. And it's something you and I have kind of talked about before, the importance of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a bit of a ramble, but how do you given the way that your journey has progressed over the years, how do you think about talking and being able to talk?
Well, the most important thing about conversation is listening. So I think the undervalued part of conversation is the bit where the person who isn't speaking and the part that they play.
Yes.
So I think that's really, really important. So I think generally speaking, we're not really trained to listen. It's been a long time since I've been in the education system, so I don't know what it's like now, but I imagine that, there's a lot of encouragement for people to speak.
Yeah.
And much, much less encouragement for people to listen, other than to listen just for information. Because kids have to pass exams and they learn to regurgitate stuff, and so there's all of that.
Mm.
But I think that there's like an embodiment to listening,
Yep.
much like your embodiment, where you're open and you're relaxed, and there's a willingness not just to hear with your ears, but to also hear with what I would say, with your heart and with your body, and so it's a kind of a full-bodied, deep listening that I learnt to do that really skillfully as a Samaritan's listening volunteer. So depending on where your audience is from, in the UK we have a telephone service that's referred to as the Samaritans, where people who are distressed can ring and have someone listen to them as they talk through their distress.
Yeah.
And it's the training is a masterclass in being really open to hearing what it is that somebody is saying, and to be alongside them in their pain and their discomfort and their anxiety and their suffering. And it's surprising how little you need to say.
Yeah.
But how deeply you need to listen.
Yes.
And to almost like be like if you think of a bed of reeds in the wind, or a field of wheat, the wheat or the reeds, they're just waiting to be touched by the wind, and then they'll move. And it's kind of the same thing when you're learning to listen. Just allow yourself to be really still in your body, but also in your head, and allow yourself to be moved by what it is that someone's saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing in any relationship, particularly in relationships between adults, but really important in relationships with children. But the role of teachers, yes, teachers need to be at the front of the class and give information, but at the same time, teachers need to listen. And I appreciate that the education system in this country, and probably in lots of countries, is not set up that way. And I think it's the same in the medical profession. Things aren't set up in this country for doctors and nurses to really listen to what people say. But if it were set up that way, I would imagine that people would be much more proactive in their own health and in their own healing.
Yes.
Rather than offloading their power onto somebody else. And I think the same would be true in business, in management, in leadership in general, and of course in politics.
Yeah. And it strikes me when you're talking, and I agree with everything you're saying, that it's rare to be listened to in the way that you're describing. But when you are, you feel seen and heard in a way that is really rare.
Yes.
And just again thinking about, well, I suppose my point is, for those that are suffering out there, feeling seen and heard can be an incredibly therapeutic experience. So you don't necessarily, for young men out there that are really struggling, for example, yes, Samaritans might be a way forward, but simply sitting with a friend, if you can find a friend that knows how to listen, can be transformative.
Yeah. And I don't think yes, that's very valid in a therapeutic context, but in like you say, a friendship context or a parenting context, immense healing can be done by just giving somebody, again, I've just used the word just, to scratch that. But yeah, giving somebody the opportunity to be heard.
Yeah.
And non-judgmentally.
Yeah, that's right. And now when we think about the just incredibly damaging political discourse where we're talking about the non-existence of conversations between two people who hold different views.
Yes.
Neither person is hearing the other. And if we, and your work and the work of people like you, if we can help people listen to each other so much more, so much more can be done for the world.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And remember, like most politicians, their role is not to try and understand what the other person on the other side is saying. Their role is to convince them. But even then, I don't think the way that that's done is it's not a very enlightened way of doing that.
No.
The first thing you do is you find out what the other person has to say, and you actually try and understand it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it takes longer, and I appreciate that it seems like you're going around the houses to achieve this, but in the long term, it's by far the fastest way.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that someone will do when they feel heard is that there's this, and again, this is one of nature's wonderful gifts, is the thing of reciprocity. As soon as you feel heard by me, then there's something inside of you that goes, well, now I want to hear about what this person's got going on for them and what's going on inside of them. So the job just happens naturally.
Yeah.
Someone has to be enlightened enough at the beginning to be able to go, so I want to hear about what you've got to say, Julian.
Yes. Yeah. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing today?
It would, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it feels like we're in the home straight of the conversation.
Yeah.
The podcast is called The Human Edge, and one of the reasons for the name is because I want to explore my guests' edge, what their insecurities are, what their vulnerabilities are, and how they've overcome insecurities and vulnerabilities along the way. We haven't touched on it yet, but you had a couple of experiences early on in your childhood which were incredibly traumatic, I think is maybe the word I can use for it, but obviously they were your experiences, not mine. One is your sister leaving home, and you can talk to me why that was, and the other was the death of your brother. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and kind of the effect that those experiences had on you at the time?
Yeah. So Right, so it feels important to say that the thing about trauma is it's kind of one of these really popular words that gets bandied around in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And so it feels important to say that when people experience trauma, it's a very, very individual thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I speak about my experience, I'm definitely not paralleling my experience of people who have experienced war or earthquakes or abuse or any of those things, right? But when whatever one's experience is, if the kind of the heightened emotion of that experience is for some reason trapped inside the body, that's trauma.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is why 5 people can experience exactly the same event, but they'll all come out of it completely differently.
Sure.
Right? And some will be more or less affected than others. So that just feels really important to say.
Yeah, no, it is really important to say, and thank you for saying, and it's interesting for me thinking about your kind of definition of trauma. It is the emotion that's trapped inside the body as a result of the experience. That's the trauma, and so the healing then, and we'll come on to that for you as well, is the process by which that emotion is able to be. You're able to help that emotion out of the body.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it helps. Yeah. To help to find the ways to move it through you. So right back at the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned about my parents and the context of how they were brought up, where emotions, particularly challenging emotions, they just didn't know how to deal with it. So it was just like, okay, right, let's just not even, let's just pretend it's not there. And so that first event of my sister leaving home, so my sister's 14 years older than me, and she was kind of like a mother figure, and she left home when I was 7, and because of the way that it was done, so I found out about my sister leaving when I saw the suitcase by the front door, and she was about to go to the airport. So it was like, like my whole world had been literally just kind of turned upside down. And I remember having this kind of complete 7-year-old emotional meltdown, and it was like she was gone, and then it was like never talked about. Like all of that stuff was never talked about, which is the way that my parents dealt with those things. But what that meant for me was that I felt very like, what do I do with that? And if you don't know what to do with it, then it doesn't have a route out.
Yeah.
So it has to find a place where it settles in your body somewhere, and it settles somewhere where it feels relevant. So it turns out, and I didn't realise this at the time, of course, but it turns out that physical manifestation manifested around my heart space. And the thing that I experienced was a real, like a powerful contraction in the whole left side of my body, where I lost a lot of movement, a lot of power, a lot of strength. So it's really hard for me to reach out with my left arm compared to my right arm. Lots of limited movement in my rib cage, in my chest, and breathing, and all of those sorts of things. And years later, through therapy, what I discovered was it's like I had this kind of like a spiritual heart attack at that point, where it's like my heart experienced so much pain and heartache, and it didn't know what to do with it and how to deal with it. So, well, okay, it just shuts down. So it took some years of therapy with an amazing therapist who's become this kind of incredible mentor to me. Unfortunately, he died about a month ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, he was a priest, but he became an expert in psychosomatic diseases, conditions, particularly anorexia and bulimia and stuff. But he would help a lot of people because he was an active priest all his working life, and he would spend hours with people when doctors could only spend minutes. He would spend hours with people, and people found the listening healing. And he spent hours listening to me, and he would give me homework to talk to my parents, to talk to my siblings, to find out what was really going on in that whole family context, that whole family ecosystem that allowed me to heal myself. So I went through that whole emotional healing, and then as part of that, I ended up going on this kind of physical healing journey through a couple of modalities. One is called Rolfing, and another one is called the Feldenkrais method. But I've really immersed myself in the Feldenkrais method as a way of re-establishing healthy habits in my body, healthy patterns in my body that allow for free movement, easeful movement, elegant movement, and then for me that all kind of ties in beautifully with this idea of sovereign leadership. So whilst there was this contraction as a way of protecting myself, and that was right and that was timely, later on in life, it's like, okay, right, now I feel stronger enough in myself to be able to, right, let's take on whatever it is that I'm having to deal with. And that is a very, very different place to come from, when I'm kind of taking on things in the world. So that all happened when I was 7. 4 years later, my brother took his own life. And myself and all of my family were still very much immersed in this thing of we don't know how to deal with this stuff, and so we all suffered in silence and in isolation around my brother's death. And like I say, once I got into my 40s, after a divorce, after just not being able to be really emotionally articulate in the world, in relationships, in business, in life in general, I ended up on this wonderful journey that has led to a lot of emotional healing and physical healing, and also a spiritual healing as well. There's a how would I define that? A sense of being at peace with, I am mortal. Life isn't going to go on forever for me. And it's important to come to be able to be at peace with that. And then that frees you to do more of what you're here to do.
Yeah, that's an incredibly liberating perspective on life.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does. Great. Thank you. And as we sit here today, because we all have, no matter how confident we are, no matter how secure we are in our place in the world, I think we all, as human beings, we all still have an edge. We all still have insecurities. And what's yours?
Oh, being seen. Being seen, being heard, being a stand for what's important to me, even when that risks upsetting or displeasing other people. Saying something controversial that someone's going to go, hold on, wait a minute. Yeah. So that's really my edge. So that's why I'm so thrilled to be to have been invited here to speak with you, because it gives me an opportunity to practice that.
Yeah, I love it.
And it's not so much that, it's not like I'm saying anything really controversial particularly, but of course there are always going to be people that disagree with what I say. But, when I know it to be true that when I speak from my heart and when I speak from my experience, that there's a truth in that for me, and I can always speak to that.
Yeah, and you have my experience of the conversation. I'm sure people watching and listening as well. You have spoken from your heart. You have been vulnerable, and people will see you, hear you for who you truly are. So you are definitely leaning into your edge today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It feels like I could talk to you for another hour, but time is up.
Yes.
And I thank you for coming in. It's been a really great conversation.
Thank you very much. Well done. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.